Listen.
The scam, brother, the scam!
Oi, mate, my personal life's great. Some of you would love me more if I rub that in your face. Okay, well, let us run down the resume and have a little chat about Akala's living today.
Describe Akala. Well, as strange as it feels to talk about myself in the third person, I suppose I'm a hip-hop artist that, and various other things, but hip-hop artist primarily, that tries to use my music to tackle or deal with or speak about the way I view the world, some of my life experiences, some of my opinions on the way the world is. And what you see is what you get. I'm kind of like that in real life. So the same subjects I talk about in my music, anyone that knows me knows if you have a conversation with me on any given day of the week, those are similar subjects I like to talk about on a daily basis. Politics, colonialism, inequality, etc.
Yeah, so may have won a couple awards. I guarantee you that my family...
Winning the Mumbai was interesting because I'm an independent artist. I'm not on a big label. The year before, in fact, 2 years in a row, it was won by an independent British hip-hop artist. The year before, a brother called Sway, who I know really well, is a talented MC. He won it the year before, and then I won it. And so it created a bit of a story at the time. I suppose it put us on a platform. You know, the Mumbai is like any big award ceremony, is a certain platform that gives you a certain amount of recognition.
Give a moment if you disagree with my vultures. Ready to blow this at any given moment if you disagree with my vultures.
So filming the Dewarists was an amazing experience. You know, it was great to have Amit and Prashant collaborate musically, you know, with mine and Piyush's input, and then myself and Piyush write a song together that we feel reflects some of the commonalities we have in our music, some of the similar things we like to deal with. And of course, going to the beautiful Andaman Islands was once in a lifetime experience.
Where's the originality?
Well, obviously, I mean, my sister was really well known long before I was. And I suppose in the beginning when I first came out, it was a mix. It was a gift and a curse. On the one hand, I got a certain amount of attention because of it. On the other hand, a certain amount of people didn't really want to take me seriously within the industry, particularly the so-called urban industry. There was sort of a sense of it's just a bit of a gimmick. But as I progressed more and more and built my own kind of fan base, many of whom have no idea who my sister even is. They know who she is, but they don't know she's related, that she's my sister, if you say. And so it's not so much an issue no more. I can just respect the achievement she's had and be proud of that, and vice versa. But it's not really, in the UK at least, a comparison people bring up much anymore because we're so kind of well known in our own spheres. Whereas I suppose outside the UK, her name is still obviously much more well known. So it would maybe be people's introduction would come through that route.
What you're about to hear, some of you may know of it, some of you may not. It's Shakespeare's most famous poem, Sonnet 18. I haven't doctored it to make it fit to the rhythm, but just listen close. Okay, yo. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate.
So in terms of starting with Hip-Hop Shakespeare and mixing what seems such opposite and such disparate and different artistic entities, it really came from my upbringing. I was exposed to theatre really early. My stepdad was stage manager of the Hackney Empire. I went to that theatre, which is a famous theatre in East London, predominantly African Caribbean led theatre when I was a young boy coming up. And because I spent so much time in that theatre, I was exposed to that world. And out of that exposure and my exposure to art and also sound system culture, the commonality in poetry between playwriting and music was always clear to me. But it was only in 2009 we officially launched the company and made these direct, very specific comparisons for the purpose of teaching and performing.
Apparently, I'm second generation black Caribbean and half white Scottish, whatever that means. See, lately, I feel confused with the boxes, because to me, all they do is breed conflict. It's not.
I think being of mixed heritage is complicated. And it definitely contributes to my worldview, and I can love and respect both sides of my heritage, which I do. But I also live in the real world, where there's a certain amount of, even in the UK, a particular discrimination towards black people. And in the UK, I'm seen as a black person, let's be clear. It's not like South Africa or other places where there's a tiny minority in the legacy of apartheid where you have coloureds. We don't have coloureds in England. So we have a police department, for example, that is just, their job is to police young black men. And this is what's said publicly. It's called Operation Trident, so-called black on black violence. But a lot of the people they police have my ethnic makeup. their mum's white, dad's black, or vice versa. So the young boy that was shot last year when the riots kicked off, Mark Duggan, he's like that, for example. His mum's white, his dad's black. But the news had no problem or no issue with him being referred to as just a black person. Because if you're a criminal, of course, they can make that association. Not saying he was a criminal, I'm saying that was association. Whereas if you are seen as more positive or more intelligent, then maybe they'll call you mixed race. But they'll never call you white, no matter how much you want to be, or some people of mixed heritage want to identify with white. So for me, it's about loving and respecting both, or all heritages in the world, but particularly both sides of your heritage and being comfortable with that. But also realizing you exist in the real world and exist in the political space. So for me, I've been brought up, I suppose, more in contact with the African Caribbean side of my heritage. And I think that's informed my political consciousness and my way to view the world. That doesn't mean I neglect the other side, it just means that's the way I've been brought up. If I was, say, I don't know, half Bengali, half Punjabi, I might be brought up more in one culture than the other and identify more in one culture than the other, but love and respect both. So I think for me, hip-hop is an art form that comes out of African Caribbean culture. I'm very clear about that. And I'm very clear about respecting the genesis historically that has, but equally Shakespeare. But it's interesting you ask that question, because in the UK, people would never see me celebrating Shakespeare as me celebrating part of my heritage, even though I'm half British. So it's very strange. That's the only time I've ever been asked that question, because Shakespeare is not even seen as white. He's just seen as normal. Does that make sense? So white intelligence is the intelligence. White philosophy is the philosophy. Anything else is different, is radical. So there's such a thing as Indian philosophy or black music, but there's no white music because the mainstream is white. Does that make sense? So for me to celebrate Shakespeare is obviously embracing another side of my heritage, but in the country that I come from, it's rarely put in those terms and it's rarely seen that way, because we're not yet comfortable, maybe in some senses, associating people who we consider immigrants to England with British culture, even though there were people from all over the world in England, even in Shakespeare's time. So in a long sort of roundabout sense, I would say I'm at ease with both sides of my heritage, but I also am not naive to the way things are. There's no black country in which, in my dad's lifetime, people of my complexion were legally not human beings. Does that make sense? Whereas obviously in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in America even, in Australia, there's this legacy of the other side of my heritage being treated in a particular way. And I think it's, personally, this is my personal view, is naive of people of mixed heritage to ignore that and just try and play the middle. You have to, without, like I said, without disassociating yourself, you have to understand that reality and that legacy and that history and what that means for you as a person who shares these two heritages. If you're committed to justice. If you're not committed to justice, you're not bothered about that, then you can just take your light skin privilege, because of course people of my complexion are seen as being the acceptable face of blackness. So you can have a president in America whose mum's white, whose dad's black, and he be sold to the world as a black man because he's the acceptable face of blackness. But maybe if he was Wesley Snipes' complexion, it will make people a little more uncomfortable. So I mean, so I think it's not fair to not deal with all those complications if you're politically educated as a person of mixed heritage.
And did you learn the numbers you count with every day was invented by Indian people? I bet you didn't. Or how many million Indians fought for Britain in both world wars? Still you got the cheek to call them immigrants. We don't learn about...
So my Indian experience so far has been amazing, like genuinely amazing. Obviously, like any country in the world, there's problems, there's issues, there's injustice, which is quite visible in many parts of the world, more so than in others, and India is one of those places where the injustice is visible. But because I suppose I have a bit of historical background, a bit of understanding of politics, I get a sense of why that exists. And it's not totally dissimilar to somewhere like Jamaica, where my family is from, where the injustice is more visible than, say, it is in England. But there's such a beauty of culture here, depth of culture, particularly in Mumbai, of all the places I've been to, a certain spiritual, musical resonance, and of course the physical beauty of the landscape. And so last time I was here, the Ganesha festival was on, which was incredible to see. This time I'm here, I'm going to get to see Diwali. I've been to a lot of the national museums in Delhi, and just really I feel like I've got a taste of the proper culture of India. And I can't say I'm surprised, because of course we have so many people from India in the UK who I have interacted with, that I already had a sense culturally, but it's still different. You know, Indians who've been in England since World War II are still different, still have a different... They haven't got their finger on the pulse of what's new and what's happening every day in India, even if they've got a sense of that classical Indian culture. So it's definitely been great to be here. I intend to come back many more times. And yeah, just all the people that have looked after me while I've been here have been fantastic.
What is this thing I see? This silly little thing called me. This skin, this hair, this flesh, this brain, this pain, this mess.
So my plans for the future, among other things, I'm working on a new EP called The Ruins of Empires. When I go back to the UK in a couple of weeks, I've got a tour of England starting on the 25th of November. Working on a few TV bits, I've been writing a script. New album, probably middle of next year. That'll be my 4th album. Just grafting away, trying to do as much as I can and express myself through art.
No, we're not reverent, but we don't even yet know if we're relevant. One more pause, one more breath, one more pause, one more breath. Is this all that there is? If it is, I wish I could give one more pause, one more breath. We can never know if we're ever next. Every time I think I know, I stop and ask myself.
Big up people, this is Akala. I want to send a shout out to all my people over there at Zomba.in. Big up.